with Wall Street's collapse. We warned people to avoid Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers, General Motors, and dozens of other companies that have since collapsed. We even helped our subscribers find opportunities to profit from these moves by shorting stocks and buying put options. To my knowledge, no other research firm in the world can match our record of correctly predicting the catastrophe that occurred in 2008 and the rebound that has occurred since then. The video presentation we created 3 years ago to explain the financial crisis and our thoughts on what would happen next has become the most watched online financial video in history as far as we can tell. But that's not why I created this follow-up presentation. I reference our success and experience with Wall Street's latest crisis because we believe there is an even bigger crisis lurking, something that will shake the very foundation of America. I know that to most people, the situation seems to be getting better. Stocks have recovered nearly all of their losses. Real estate has rebounded. Unemployment and bankruptcies have dropped. But here's the thing. The unfortunate reality is that we are actually in a much more dangerous and precarious place today than we were 5 years ago. And that is why I've spent a significant amount of time and money in the past few months preparing this presentation. In short, I want to talk about a specific event that will take place in America's very near future, which could actually bring our country and our way of life to a grinding halt. This looming crisis is related to the financial crisis of 2008, but it is infinitely more dangerous, as I'll explain in this video. As this problem comes to a head, I expect there will be a near complete shutdown of the American economy. Life as we have known it for more than 40 years will essentially cease to exist. Our governments on both the federal and state level will shut down. Banks will not open. Businesses will at least temporarily shutter their doors. I expect we'll see martial law enforced by the U.S. military. Believe me, I don't make this prediction lightly, and I have no interest in trying to scare you. I'm simply following my research to its logical conclusion. I did the same when I tracked Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's accounting, also with General Motors, Lehman Brothers, and the rest. And when I began giving this warning in 2006, no one took me very seriously, not at first. Back then, most mainstream commentators just ignored me. But when I presented my case and exposed the facts at economic conferences, they got angry. They couldn't refute my research, but they weren't ready to accept the enormity of its conclusions either. That's why, before I go any further, I have to warn you. What I am going to say is controversial. It will offend many people, Democrats, Republicans, and Tea Partiers alike. In fact, I've already received dozens of pieces of hate mail. And the ideas and solutions I'm going to present might seem somewhat radical to you at first, perhaps even un-American. My guess is that, as you watch this presentation, you'll say, there's no way this could really happen, not here. But just remember, no one believed me 4 years ago when I said the world's largest mortgage bankers, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, would soon go bankrupt. And no one believed me when I said GM would soon go bankrupt as well, or that the same would happen to General Growth Properties, the biggest owner of mall property in America. But again, that's exactly what happened. No one believed me in 2011 when I said the crisis would cause riots in the streets. Then came the protests in Wisconsin and the Occupy Wall Street movement all over the country. And that brings us to today. The same financial problems I've been tracking from bank to bank and from company to company for the last 6 years have now found their way into the U.S. Treasury. I'll explain how this came to be. What it means is critically important to you and every American. The next phase and this crisis will threaten our very way of life. The savings of millions will be wiped out. This disaster will change your business and your work. It will dramatically affect your savings accounts, investments, and retirement. It will change everything about your normal way of life, where you vacation, where you send your kids or grandkids to school, how and where you shop, the way you protect your family and home. I'll explain how I know these events are about to happen. You can decide for yourself if I'm full of hot air. As for me, I'm more certain about this looming crisis than I've been about anything else in my life. I am literally afraid for my family's future, and I have taken drastic steps to prepare for what I know must inevitably happen next. I know that debts don't just disappear. I know that bailouts have big consequences. And unlike most of the pundits on TV, I know a lot about finance and accounting. And this is all coming to a head much, much sooner than most Americans think. Of course, the most important part of this situation is not what is happening, but rather what you can do about it. In other words, will you be prepared when the biggest financial crisis in America in more than 50 years hits. Don't worry, I'm not organizing a rally or demonstration, and I've turned down every request to run for political office. Instead, I want to show you exactly what I'm doing personally to protect my family and to perhaps and even grow my money, and how you can prepare as well. You see, I can tell you with near 100% certainty that most Americans will not know what to do when commodity prices, things like milk, bread, and gasoline, soar. They won't know what to do when banks close and their credit cards stop working, or when they're not allowed to buy gold or foreign currencies, or when food stamps fail or their Social Security checks come to a halt. In short, our way of life in America is about to change, I promise you. In this video, I'll show you exactly what is happening and why it is inevitable. Again, you can challenge every single one of my facts, and you'll find that I'm right about each allegation I make. Then, I hope you will take action for yourself. Will you act now to protect yourself and your family from the catastrophe that's brewing in Washington, D.C.? I hope so. That's why I created this presentation. I'm going to walk you through exactly what I am doing personally and what you can do as well. I can't promise you'll emerge from this crisis completely unharmed, but I guarantee you'll be a lot better off than people who don't follow these simple steps. But I'm getting ahead of myself just a bit. Let me back up and show you, in the simplest terms possible, what is going on, why I am so concerned, and what I believe will happen in the next 12 months. I believe that we as Americans are about to see a major collapse in our national monetary system and our normal way of life. Basically, for many years now, our government has been borrowing so much money, very often using short-term loans, that very soon we will no longer be able to afford even the interest on these loans. Again, I say these things as an expert in accounting and financial research. You may not think things are that bad in the U.S. economy, but consider this simple fact from the University of New Mexico Bureau of Business and Economic Research. Even if all U.S. citizens were taxed 100% of their income for an entire year, that's every penny earned by every citizen in the entire country, it would still not be enough to pay off our debts, not even close. We'd still be trillions of dollars short. Yet, I've never seen this fact reported anywhere else. And right now, today, the federal government has to borrow 46 cents of every dollar they spend, spending that stands at a staggering average of $435.8 million per hour. How is that possibly sustainable? Normally, I study these kinds of numbers when I'm looking at a business to invest in or to recommend to my readers. But lately, I've spent most of my time looking into our national balance sheet, because as the banking system collapsed in 2008, all of the bad debts were absorbed by the world's governments, and it continues to this day. We began the year 2013 with a net public debt that has more than doubled since the year before Barack Obama took office. These overwhelming public financial obligations are completely unprecedented in the history of our country, outside of the two major global wars we fought in the 20th century. But even these incredible figures don't tell the real story, or even half of it. Various other government agencies and private companies taken over by the government also have obligations of nearly another $5 trillion. We've already booked complete losses on $140 billion worth of these obligations, yet they remain completely off the federal balance sheet. When you add these other genuine federal obligations that exist right now today, you come up with a total debt figure that's much more than $20 trillion. Far more than half of these debts were assumed under President Obama. We don't know what the full burden of these new and existing debts will be in total over time. That's because the Federal Reserve's power to manipulate interest rates is unlimited. At least for now, that's the case. We don't know how much of Fannie's and Freddie's bad debts will eventually be covered by the U.S. Treasury. We do know they have an unlimited line of credit, so it's a safe bet that we haven't seen the last of these charges. Finally, we have no idea what the eventual costs of the Federal Reserve's ongoing expansion of the monetary base will be over the long term. The one thing that's certain, however, these debts will not be free. They will carry a burden. Today, we have more government debt than any country in the history of the world. We have more debt than every country in the European Union combined. With each additional commitment, we sink further and further into debt, closing in upon the moment that we can simply no longer afford even the interest payments on our obligations. And here's the part that really matters. The cost of maintaining our debts are about to skyrocket. Right now, the Federal Reserve is manipulating interest rates down to almost zero. As a result, the interest rate at which our government can borrow money is at a record low level. In fact, the Federal Reserve has lowered its benchmark interest rate 10 times since August 2007, from 5.25% to a zone between 0 and 0.25%. Obviously, the current rate won't last forever. But what will happen if the average real interest rate ends up being just 4% annually and we pay it off over 30 years like a mortgage? Incredibly, we'll spend $34.3 trillion to simply repay what we owe right now. If the rate ends up being 6%, we'll spend $43.1 trillion. Now, of course, our politicians believe that through policy and currency manipulation, they can simply avoid paying any of these costs. They can order the Federal Reserve to prevent interest rates from ever rising to a level that would cost the American people anything. They believe they can manage the economy so the debts of Fannie and Freddie won't go bad. They believe, without any proof whatsoever, that they can stimulate the economy by even more deficit spending so that it grows faster, allowing tax revenues to produce a surplus. Repaying these debts, they say, will be easy and painless. But you know better, my friend. You must know better. The wages of sin must be paid, and they will be paid. Paul Krugman, one of the most widely read and respected economists in our country, wrote about this incredibly naive and ridiculous solution in a January 7th, 2013 New York Times column. He said, "There's a legal loophole allowing the Treasury to mint platinum coins in any denomination the Secretary chooses. Yes, it was intended to allow commemorative collector's items, but that's not what the letter of the law says. And by minting a $1 trillion coin, then depositing it at the Fed, the Treasury could acquire enough cash to sidestep the debt ceiling, while doing no economic harm at all." Very few people, even our most influential economists, seem to remember that the utility of money and credit are based upon their soundness. Money allows people to exchange goods and services widely, greatly increasing the specialization of labor and facilitating the economic magic of competitive advantage. Money also plays the critical function of facilitating communications between and among many disparate actors. Price changes guide producers and consumers. But when the money can't be trusted, this entire system breaks down. The price signals can't be relied upon, and it becomes harder and harder for people to exchange labor and capital. Likewise, credit enables an economy to grow by facilitating the growth of savings and capital investment through real interest rates. But very few people are willing to delay consumption and trust their savings in an economy that refuses to pay savers any return above inflation for their savings. And that's exactly where we are today. Although to most Americans, everything seems calm, and that we are enjoying an economic recovery, I can promise you this: we are trapped. There is no way out. And nobody in Washington, not Republicans, not Democrats, not even Tea Partiers, want you to realize how precarious our government's finances really are. They can't afford for you to understand this dilemma for what it means. But here's the thing, and this is the big secret the government hopes you never understand. According to even my most conservative calculations, again, using numbers provided by the Congressional Budget Office, a debt default by the U.S. government would be inevitable, were it not for one simple anomaly, the one thing that has saved the United States so far. I'm talking about our country's unique ability to simply print more money. You see, the U.S. government has one very important weapon to use in this crisis so far. We are the only debtor in the world who can legally print U.S. dollars. And the U.S. dollar is what's known as the world's reserve currency. The dollar forms the basis of the world's financial system. It is what banks around the world hold in reserve against their loans. Again, that's a secret most politicians don't understand. As things stand right now, the U.S. government can't go broke in any ordinary sense of the word, because it can simply print dollars to pay for its bad debts. It's been doing so since March of 2009. That might sound pretty good at first. Since we can always just print more money, what is there to worry about? Well, let me show you why our biggest advantage is about to disappear. You see, as things stand today, America is the only country in the world that doesn't have to pay for its imports in a foreign currency. Here's what I mean. Let's say you're a German and you want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. You can't just pay for your oil in German marks or the new euro currency because the oil is priced in dollars. So you have to buy dollars first, then buy your oil. And that means the value of the German currency is of great importance to the German government. To maintain the value of its currency, Germans must produce at least as much as they consume from around the world. Otherwise, the value of its currency will begin to fall, causing prices to rise and its standard of living to decline. But in America, we've been able to consume as much as we want without worrying about acquiring the money to pay for it, because our dollars are accepted everywhere around the world. In short, for decades now, we haven't had to produce anything or export anything to get all the dollars we needed to buy all the oil and other goods our country required. All we had to do was borrow and print more money. And boy, did we. Take a look at this chart. Even as late as the 1970s, America was the world's largest creditor. But by the mid-1980s, we'd become a debtor to the world. And since the late 1990s, we've been the world's largest debtor. Today, our government owes more money to more people than anyone else in the world. With all of these bad debts piling up, we've had to begin repaying our debts by printing trillions of new dollars. With QE3, the latest round of quantitative easing, the Fed is now promising to print $85 billion a month. That's over $1 trillion a year. And now finally, the impact of this is being felt in a big way. As our creditors figure out what's happening, we are beginning to have very, very big problems. I believe our creditors, which include foreign countries and other investors here and abroad, will either completely stop accepting dollars in repayment or greatly discount the value of these new dollars. I'm sure you think that sounds crazy, but as I'll show you, it is already happening. In fact, Zha Shougang, a researcher at the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies, recently said, "The shortcomings of the current international monetary system pose a big threat to China's economy." That's why China is now actively taking steps to phase out the U.S. dollar because of its frustration with the U.S. government's mismanagement of our currency. And how does our government respond? We have the audacity to label China a currency manipulator. Do you see the irony here? As a result of what our government is doing today, I'm confident we will soon see an end of the U.S. dollar standard. In fact, I'm 100% sure of it. It's not a matter of if, but when. And I think it's going to happen much, much sooner than most people think. Of course, I'm not the only one saying this. Even some mainstream publications like the New York Post are recognizing the inevitability of this event. The Post recently reported that the U.S. dollar is getting perilously close to losing its status as the world's reserve currency. Should it cross the line, the 2008 financial crisis could look like a summer storm. And billionaire Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates, the largest and best performing hedge fund in the world, told CNBC that it is inevitable that the dollar's role as the world's currency will diminish from the dominant world currency to one of a few. Quote, "It will fade probably fairly quickly, so the United States, which accounts for almost 2/3 of the reserves, will probably go down to 50% of the world's reserves." Keep in mind, the U.S. dollar has been the world's reserve currency for decades now, so most Americans don't have a clue about what the repercussions are of losing this status. And maybe you think it could never happen, but the truth is,